All right, what's up, everybody? This is A7X fan Ben, and welcome back to the Pirates CSG podcast. This is episode number 59, and I'm extremely happy and grateful to welcome one of the most special guests that I'll ever be able to have on, and that's game designer Mike Mulvihill. Thanks so much for doing this.
Not a problem. This is so cool. When you make something and then it goes out there, you don't know where and how many legs it has. You just know that you put your heart and soul into it for a little while. And the fact that here we are in 2023 still talking about pirates is like one of the coolest things in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm super glad. I mean, it's been a while, so hopefully people will forgive me for going, I don't remember that. But I'm more than happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. For anyone listening that didn't see the questions thread, Mike is like one of the essential founding fathers of the game. He designed a ton of the game pieces and was heavily involved in game piece creation and game mechanic creation for the majority of the sets. So he is like one of the biggest titans of the game in the history of it, along with Mike Selinker, Jordan Wiseman, and others. So, so how did you get involved with Pirate CSG? How did it all start for you?
All right, so it's less about how it started for me and how it started. Let's just say, okay. So, for those who don't know my background, I was a lead designer at Wizkids on both Mage Knight and HeroClix. I was the design lead, created a HeroClix for Wizkids back, whatever that was, 2001, 2002, whatever that was. And one is my wife was actually the head of, was the lead production manager for the company as well. And so she and Jordan and every once in a while one of the artists or somebody would go to China where we did our manufacturing for HeroClix and Mage Knight. And one of those trips there, Jordan saw you go to the factory, and of course the factories, like all factories would tend, while business would try to show you other things they're doing and what's really cool and what's really awesome that they're doing manufacturing for somebody else. On one of the trips, Jordan went and saw the factory, showed him that they were making the styrene plastic punch out um, uh, Gundam and figures for basically just people who don't know the Far East, China, Japan, Hong Kong at that time, the little what they call the bubble shops where you just go in and they're basically giant arcade mini stores where it's thousands of collectible types of things in little bubbles that you just buy. They were selling these packs of make a robot. There's no game involved. There's no mechanics. They were just 25 different robots that you can make using this styrene thing. Well, Jordan brought him back, and we played with them for a little while to see if there's something we can do with it, if there's some sort of game we can make. And we didn't really. We owned BattleTech, and that's what was going to be our next big push. So we were not interested in doing anything with the robot stuff. So Jordan, as the genius that he is, wouldn't let it go, and he bounced it around with a couple of other ideas. Meanwhile, my full-time job at that time was HeroClix, and I was also designing Mage Knight sets at the same time, so I had a full gig. um, so I was not, available to do any internal concepting with him, but he bounced some ideas off of me. One of them was like pirate ships. You have to understand this thing about Jordan. Jordan finds singular individuals in history to be really, really fascinating.
Hmm.
And what? No, and I'm not. It's not a. There's no insult there. It's just that there are
Yeah.
singular people in history that he will deep dive into their lives and their background because their story is really, really great. If anybody who's ever read the Three Musketeers and knows Alexander Dumas, you should read and look into his background. It is insane. Jordan has always wanted to do something about his background. One of them, in this same kind of phase of Jordan's, was Captain Morgan, the pirate captain, the guy they named a rum after because he like switched sides like 11,000 times in his life. He was actually the governor of Jamaica, I think, at one point, or at least one of
Yep.
the city ports,
Yep.
and was like, hailed as this representative for the Spanish government. Meanwhile, he was also a pirate, at the same time. It's just really crazy history. Jordan just loves history. And so when he started he was reading or doing some studying on him, and Pirates of the Caribbean was being talked about, or at least that very first trailer. I mean, really seriously, I know it's kind of weird now to go back and watch that first trailer, but just sit in a movie theater in 2000 and whatever 3, and you're sitting there and you see the guys change from skeleton to human when the moon shifts. It was unbelievable. And Jordan's also a really big Disney fan. So Pirates of the Caribbean as a ride, as a concept, was always a thing that he wished he would be able to do something like that. So he um, ended up hiring out of the company Mike Seliker and oh my god, he's gonna kill me for not remembering his name.
James
Uh,
Ernest.
James. James is like he's like a good friend of
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah.
James, to come up with a concept if we did this styrene thing with pirate ships. Uh, when it got down to the point where Jordan is actually asking the factory, "Hey, if we did pirate ships, can you show how would we do this?" And we had the problems that that are relatively known now, which is the plastic doesn't bend, it snaps. So if we do, what's the angle of bend that we can do without breaking them? What's the cut size that allows a mass to stand there and not tip over? You know, all those kinds of things, and how would we do more? Different ships. So he was doing that, and James and Mike came in with the game. Now, a thing you need to also understand about Jordan and my relationship goes way back to the FASA days, where I was in charge of Shadowrun, and before that worked on all of the various FASA games. Jordan always brought things to me to be his first guinea pig person. So at WizKids, I think I've touched all but one game. One game was a board game very later in the process. I don't even know if Jordan, but if Jordan was involved, he brought me in to do it and get it. I saw Hero Clicks, or I saw Mage Knight before they even did the first set. I played it. I talked to him about it. So this was our relationship going way back. So when he got the game concept in from Mike and James, he had me go through it and do a pass. And that was day one, I guess, of being involved in Pirates for me, because I did my pass. I gave Jordan my notes. Jordan met with them. Then we got a second pass in, and I had some more notes. And then Jordan's like, "Look, I'm getting out. You are in charge of this. You talk to them." At that point, he's like, "If you give the thumbs up, we'll move it forward. We'll sign them. We'll complete the contract with them, and then you got a new game to work on while you're here." Unfortunately, it was the same. So I had stopped working on Hero Clicks when we hired Seth, and I stopped working on Mage Knight, but I was making a game at the same time. I was making two other games: Shadowrun game, which was Shadowrun Duels, which used action figure sized miniatures or figures, I guess, and a baseball game. And now I had a third game, so it was not like number one, personal story. I love pirates, so I was like, yeah, I want to do this. Don't give this game to anybody else on the team. But B, I was also like, oh my god, where does this fit in my schedule? So yeah, that's from 0.0 to basically 1.0 in the story of the Pirates CSG.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So you were in on it from like the very start, along with Mike and James. So
Yeah,
that's good
well,
to
yeah,
know.
need to clarify how games get made a little
Yep.
bit. Mike and James were hired to make a game. They were never hired to work on a game.
Yep.
So think about it this way for people who don't know the process. Let's say we're making a Formula One car and you invented a car. Okay, that's great, but that car doesn't go 222 miles an hour or whatever it is. It doesn't have all the steering, it doesn't have all the stuff. my job is to take your car and turn it into the 225 mile an hour, precision instrument. So when Mike and James turned over that, whatever we want to call it, 1.0, 2.0 version of their rules, and I met with them and I got their input, I then go back to Jordan and say, okay, what game do you want? Because he's the guy who's one paying my salary, and if he doesn't like the game, then it's never coming out. So my job then is to synthesize their rules. They really only had the rules, and I don't even know they had a full complement of ships. I think they had enough ships for playing, maybe a little bit more. I think they may have had a 1.0 or a 0.5 version of a spreadsheet math. And like I said, I know Mike and James, and we've worked together since then a million times. So this was not even the first time I worked with him. I think I worked with James while I was at FASA on something. It was the first time I was really working with Mike, even though we knew each other for years by that point. But they're done at that point. They don't do anything more after they turned over those rules. That becomes all in-house in our design decisions, and in this case, my design decisions. But with Jordan was really heavy on set one because he had a vision for what he wanted the game to be. So I would meet with him like weekly or twice a week. Then I would take his notes. I'd flesh out the system. I was redoing the spreadsheet to make it do the things we wanted, making decisions that we needed. And then, because my job, Mike and James's job was not to make a product. Their job was to make the concept for a product. And my job is to turn their concept and Jordan's idea into a concept that Wizkids could sell. I mean, like, when it's all said and done, there's some core elements that the game that I'm very, very proud of that were basically synthesized from what Jordan was telling me in one ear and what Mike and James designed in the other ear. But that's the way all the game processes work. An inventor of a game turns it over to a publisher, and the publisher's job is to make the game a product, if you will. I mean, to use like really kind of less sexy words.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that all makes total sense.
So yes, I was there at the beginning. Decisions made. You can point at me and blame me. I will tell you why I made them, I think, if I can remember. And then we have you guys playing the game 20 some years later, and so that's actually cool. 12 years later, 15. I'm not sure. I don't really remember any of the dates. I barely can remember Monday of this week. So hopefully I can put things into levels of perspective on
Yeah,
that front.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that all makes total sense. So other than those big three WizKids folks at the start and Seth Johnson, what other WizKids employees did you work with on Pirate CSG?
Well, he worked on Pirates, and so the process would have been like this. Let's say making a set outside of the first set, because like I said, Jordan was very heavily involved, and Mike and James were involved in creating the initial, factions and units and all that kind of stuff. So I would have done the bulk of the concept. So it was my job to concept every set, which meant that I either had to find a new faction or a new ship type. At that point, I worked with a guy named at the beginning I worked with Shane Hartley, who's one of the art directors at WizKids. And Shane and I still work together, which is crazy. All these years later, we're both at Ravensburger. And a guy named Ethan Pasternak. He ended up being what we would call the graphic designer, the guy who actually laid the pieces out on the plastic. So if I wanted, for instance, the Chinese junks, or if I wanted the Norse ships or new ships like schooners and things like that, or the forts. Actually, the forts were designed for set one, and we didn't like the way they work, so we pulled them from set one. And so he would have been the one laying out the cards, trying to see it works. Then we would work with like either my wife or somebody named Tina Wegner, who was our production person, who would take those things, get them off to China so that we can see whether or not the plastic worked. This is the reason why stuff changes over the time from ship to ship, because we needed to do that. Then Ethan would have been in charge with a bunch of other artists. Shane and Ethan would have been in charge with the painting and the looks. I did all the research. So like if we find out what color the French painted their ships as a base versus what color the British painted their ships as a base, you know, if we wanted anything crazy weird like that, uh, and that's how every set was done up until when I left. Other people, Jason Michael wrote a bunch for me. It was just really hard to both do the design and the writing and work on other games. So I would outline, hey, we're doing a Norse faction. Can you give me, 5 miscellaneous Norse guys, or fiction for 10 ships, or something like that. Seth, I will state, I totally forgot until you sent me Seth is a huge, huge Jules Verne fan. So
Yep.
the whole that Jules Verne set that came from Seth just pillaring me with, when are you going to do a Jules Verne set? When are you going to do a Jules Verne set? And so that those were mine, but like those were his stuff. At the, always forever remember uh, Kelly Bonilla.
Yep.
One, I knew her from the Chicago days. That's how long I knew her, and she was working for us. She would come in and do. At the beginning, she would organize all my testing for me internally, and later we ended up with. And then there were a couple of brand managers that worked on the games as well. And whose names I can't remember, because at that time I was really not a fan of brand managers. They usually work with marketing, like Tiffany and stuff like that. I was not. I could not borrow the trouble of working with marketing, just because I was being stretched so thin while I was working at WizKids. So, but I knew them all. I mean, so there's a good percentage of people. Like Jordan wrote a lot of the first set, again, because he had done all this research into Captain Morgan, so he had that kind of mindset. He knew some names, and he knew some situations, and he knew some shenanigans from doing all that research. So he wrote most of Spanish Main. Then I wrote. I took over most of the writing for Crimson Coast. I think maybe he did some of the characters, and I did almost all the ships, and that. Then when we went and started adding new navies, he basically passed that off to me. So when the Americans come in Revolution, and then the Barbary pirates, the Mediterranean pirates in Barbary Coast, the Japanese and Norse and all that kind of stuff, that was all me. So doing the research and finding it, and then hiring writers like Jason or Seth or Kelly. I know did some writing. I know she did some mechanic stuff too as the games went on. But yeah, a lot of people. It's not a one-man operation. I mean, I may say, it may end up pointing to me to be the final guy, but that's only. I mean, I'm pretty sure the art guys threw in some suggestions too, as well. I'm what I would call myself a social designer, meaning I'm going to ask people a lot of questions. Is this right? Is this wrong? Do I go here? Do I go there? What do you think? I'll end up being the guy who makes the final call, but I want as much input as possible. And on the fiction, we had a ton of fiction writers at our leisure. So
Yeah.
I think
Awesome.
that kind of. I think that I don't even remember the question. I'm just
Yeah.
talking. So at any time, do you go, okay, Mike, stop talking? We'll figure out the next phase.
Yeah, no, that was great. That was amazing. And I'm glad I've heard of I think just about all those folks by now. So yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah, there was Tiffany took over brand from. I don't remember
It
who the
was
first brand person was on
I don't know if it
Pirates.
was like Dara or Shayna. I can't remember.
Um, Shayna was never brand at our company. She
Yeah.
was pure marketing.
Hmm.
I don't know anybody named Dean. What's her name? Oh
Dara
crap! Now,
Chesley.
now I'm gonna hunt it
But
down because you just
yeah.
sent it to me.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Sorry.
I know Tiffany mentioned the previous uh brand
Yeah, she
manager
was
on our
not there.
podcast. So
She was not on that game very long, on Pirates very long. Like I said, I mean, at that point now, you got to remember we were HeroClix was on such a rapid clip Mage Knight was kind of coming out. We had BattleTech come out at the same time. We had the Shadowrun Duels game. We had the Major League Baseball game, which had a different brand manager. Uh, then once the success of this pocket model game, I was also then working on NASCAR at the same time. So and then we were doing research on a couple of other games. There was a board game we did, two board games we did, I guess, and not the Pirates one. That was a whole different thing.
Yep.
So yeah, it was kind of there were only four true game developers at any time, and it was just how we divvied up the work. Usually there was a lead, like I was the lead on Pirates and MLB and Shadowrun. I used to be the lead on HeroClix, but then John Lightfoster took over HeroClix, and then Seth took that over. When Scott
D'Agostino?
Scott, what's that?
D'Agostino?
No,
Or pronounce
Scott.
it.
Oh my God, man, this is where it's all gonna fall apart. People are gonna think,
That's
why did you
okay.
talk to this crazy guy who's insanely not answering any of your questions correctly? Uh, Scott. Uh, I can't remember his last name, but Scott took over Mage Knight from me.
Hmm.
I was the first developer on Mage Knight. Scott took that over from me. I was the first developer on HeroClix. John took that over. That went to Seth. John kind of went to work with um, Jordan, and the head of game development there was the guy named Jim Long, and Jim kind of
Hmm.
oversaw all of us, and John ended up being more like a kind of an assistant to him and kind of a think tank guy. We
Okay.
kind of went over and worked with him on new game ideas and new concepts.
Yeah.
Then I did Pirates until I was no longer there, and I think Kelly took over it after me.
Yep.
That would have been logical. I don't know what happened after I was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then let's see, there was like, and then we would do. Kelly was in charge of like alien or horror clicks that did
Okay.
like Alien and stuff, and then I ended up getting roped back into the clicks games and worked on Halo clicks.
Hmm.
So for a while, and that was I was doing Pirates. I remember working on Halo when I was doing Pirates of the Caribbean set, the
Okay.
the Disney tie-in set.
Nice.
And then, but by that time, baseball I think was over. There were a couple of prototype things going on at that same time.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Nice.
it's crazy. I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot of people with
it's
yours.
like a weird it's weird like tapestry. It's like everybody only ever sees the full quilt at the end,
Yep.
but nobody knows that everybody was making little parts of it all over the place to
Yep.
try to get it there and helping out and I mean, although the crazy thing is all those people are still my friends.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
I
how
love it.
tight we were working on all this stuff at the same time. So
Yeah, that's part of why I like doing these interviews because you find out like little snippets that a lot of the current community would never otherwise know. So it's really great to hear the insider knowledge. So, what percentage of all the Pirates game pieces did you design, if you could estimate? Like 80% or
Okay, so I let the first set, like I said, James and Mike did the majority of the initial concepting. I don't know, like in the big picture, if I can give that one a percentage because there were a lot of hands in that one. So it was
yeah,
those two guys. It was me. It was Jordan. And then we have to make decisions based on product. So Mike and James wouldn't have been a part of that. Um, we had to make decisions based on making sure the game worked, once it, because again, an inventor only tests with the people that we tell them to test with, so they tested the game themselves. It did not go out to like a full testing path of people who've never played the game, people who didn't understand the game. And so I mean that's one of the big things. I'm sure James will it was an issue at the time, and it was still an issue. Jordan still brings it up to me. They had designed a game to be 1 is the best result and 6 is the worst result. And
yeah,
that's fine. That's math. Doesn't really matter on a D6. It's still 16% is going to be, you know, a miss or a hit, however it was. The problem with that is when you took that to testing, every player who rolled the dice and got a 6 would be like, yeah. And then they were like,
yep,
oh, 6 is bad. Oh, Or they would roll a 1 and they would go, "Oh," and you'd like, "No, that's an automatic hit."
Yeah.
And they'd be like, "Oh, yay." You know, there was like such a huge player disconnect, perceptional disconnect. This is the thing that goes on all the time in games. It's not like James made a mistake. He did the logic numbers. It just made
Hmm.
sense, okay?
Hmm.
Um, but the concept, you and I can sit here and we can come up with an awesome game concept, awesome new characters, awesome new ships, whatever it is. The minute you show it to somebody, you have to not be in the room. You have to explain it to them one time. They have to do it because I can't ship Ben to everybody's house to
Hmm.
explain nuance. You know,
Yeah.
it has to be explainable in a set of rules. It has to be simple enough that it fits the other set of rules that already exist. And all I kept, so when I met him on the second pass, I'm like, dude, is there any way we can change the dice? And they were like, James is like, doesn't matter. And I'm like, no, but it does matter. It doesn't matter mathematically. You are absolutely correct. It
Yeah.
matters not a whit mathematically. And for the gameplay, it doesn't matter. It's literally the perception at the table every time somebody rolls a die to for them to not realize that I rolled the highest value, that should be good. You
Yeah.
know, and then in order for us to convince people over time that that would have been the case, we would have had to add like flavor paragraphs of like, you know, something. When in reality, everybody defaults to one being the worst, six being the best.
Yep.
You know, and so we ended up going through this, and I don't know, you know, and so that was a big thing. But in doing that, we also wanted to have an auto hit or an auto miss. Excuse me, I can't remember which one. Maybe do we have both in there now? I can't
N-
remember.
no, just the
Is
auto
it?
miss on ones.
Yeah, the auto miss. In order to have the auto miss, though, we were running into a problem that we didn't have enough room for hits. You know,
Interesting. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
uh, especially with a base of a 3-4 kind of thing, area on a D6. Um, and so and so I made the rule that you have to exceed the value
Yep.
on the die. You can't tie. Dude, Jordan, like, I felt like one time he just called me in and I was showing these people a game and I didn't know this rule. This rule should never exist. It's like he is angry with me. And I'm like, but I have to have it. If we don't have it, the game falls apart. It becomes something else. And he was like, this is the worst rule. And then it went out and we explained it, and everybody was like, nobody even bats an eye anymore. But it was such a new thing because again, that was also public perception. Ties go to the runner, to use a baseball thing, because I was doing baseball at the same time.
Yep.
That's what you think. Well, tie's a hit, and I'm like, no, but it needs to exceed it. Otherwise, we don't have enough misses in the game. Everybody hits all the time, and
Yeah.
it wasn't. Once you explain it to players, they get it. You couldn't explain 1 versus 6 because that's a roll the dice instant reaction, but you could explain that you could just state in the rules you need to be higher than the number, and people accept it as things. So no one in Pirates goes, when they were playing the game, questioned that because it was clearly stated as a rule. And that's the other weird thing about games that have made up rules. So as long as the game is consistently logical with its made up rules, you are consistently logical playing by them. So yeah, there were like stuff like that was like calls I had to make versus calls that were handed down. Jordan's Jordan's mandate from day one was you have to play the game out of the pack.
Yep.
So we actually had to come up with two sets of rules. One is, hey, open up this pack, give somebody a ship, and you take a ship, and now you go and play. It's not a very fun game. It's not, but it taught you the rules. You can play it for $3.95. That was a big, people don't know this little factoid as well, and it goes even to my job today. Price matters, and consumer always go, "Oh no, I'll pay anything for that." And the answer is no, you won't.
Yeah.
You don't really. So we were like, for 4.95 a pack. I mean, we really, really wanted to do something like that for HeroClix as well. We never, I don't think, pulled the trigger on that. That's where the whole idea started. If you bought a booster pack and you could be a single game out of the booster pack, that would be awesome. We never could get all the parts to work on that. in fact, I was just talking to Seth about it the other night when we met. But it's like, what are the big takeaways that I had to deal with? And one of them was I had to make sure that it was a playable game out of each pack. And like I said, it's not very effectively playable game out of every pack, but you can learn the rules. You get it. You could sail your ship around and move them around. And then when you bought a second pack and you started making your own navies, then it was actually had that secondary jolt of excitement. But that was the goal, and so that's something Mike and James never had to worry about. That was not on their parameters. That was on me making a product parameters. So Pirates of the Spanish Main. Let's just say that was 25, 25, 25, and 25. How's that for politically correct?
Yeah, it makes sense.
After Pirates of the, and they may have concepted forts. I don't think we had any built. I can't remember. That's the reason why Crimson Coast doesn't have any. Crimson Coast added the French, right?
Yep.
Yeah, in the forts.
Yeah,
And so
there is one.
From Crimson Coast on to when I was done, which I just realized I think was either Ocean's Edge or Rise of the Fiends. I was like 90. Well, from a concept standpoint, it was 100% a concept for me. After that, it becomes a who was assigned what in doing stuff. So like obviously any of the actually that's not true. It's probably more Pirates of the Spanish Main is the more like 5-20% because Shane on our team, the look and feel of the game is incredible.
Yeah.
So they're an equal 20%, if you will. So after that, it's probably concepting. It's like 100% me and then from the product standpoint, it's probably like 75% me, 25% the art team, and then after basically probably beginning with Revolution, because Jordan had a lot of leftover writing that we used in Crimson Coast. But after Revolution, it was probably on a product standpoint, it was probably me. So concept is like 90%, 10% art team, and then after that, it's probably I'm like I guess 75% me on everything, and then 25% with other writers helping me out. Nobody did ship design. I did 100% of all the ship design, like the mechanics.
Yep.
And then I get play tester feedback. And then but a lot of the fiction writing and the art obviously is not me. But the fiction writing I farm out. And then when I come up with a concept for a different kind of ship, then I would sit with Ethan and he would do all the heavy lifting, i.e. art. You don't want me drawing anything. So that was the process through all those sets.
So it sounds like from Crimson Coast until maybe either Caribbean or Rise of the Fiends, you were basically 100% of like ship stats and abilities, like the actual gameplay, what matters
Yeah.
for gameplay.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Awesome.
Yeah, just carry uh it's kind of cool to be in charge of a game like that and to be in charge of it moving forward. I mean, that's like I said, there's good things in it. You can say, hey, good job, Mike. If there's bad things in it, you can say you screwed up, and a lot of times I'll go, yeah, I did. And sometimes I'll be like, I don't remember screwing up, but if you say so, and then product decisions are weird, just so you know, Ben, in the sense that like what sets got reprinted versus when we changed from the narrow mass to the
connected sails, basically.
Yeah, the connected sail masts.
Yep.
When we made that change, that kind of stuff. There's reasons why all those things were done. Some of them were in my, some of them came from outside my camp, but they would come to me to say, "Hey, is this okay to do?" I mean, effectively, I'm the director, I guess, or showrunner, if you will. I'm involved with everything, except in this case, for this game, I was also involved in the writing, if you will, the mechanics.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Was there always a concrete formula for making the point costs for the game pieces? And if not, when did it come into being? And if you're able to share.
Okay, so Wizkids, that's a really great question. Wizkids' basis was antithetical if you will, to what was happening in the card game market. All right. In the card game market, what the initial card games, so all the card games, and it didn't matter which one, there's a thing called the hockey stick, which is you find this kind of curve picture of like, here are all the low cost cards, and as they go up in power, they would tend to go up in cost. They're in gameplay cost, if you will. So
Yep.
how much mana does a card need is dependent on how powerful the game designers think it is. But that's all eyeball. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no like, this power costs 0.5 of a point or 0.75 of a point. When WizKids created Mage Knight, they created it. It was some Microsoft guys, some computer game guys, some high end, some math guys, and they created a formula.
Yep.
And the formula was like, every stat has a value, but in order to create a value, you need a 0 point. Okay. So instead of it being a hockey stick, it was more of a plotted out X, Y, Z kind of chart, like a almost 3-dimensional kind of, or four grids, like a minus X and X minus X, Y minus Y kind of chart, where you were gridding somebody, and then how they were affected during different parts of the game for hero clicks, because it had a dial, and not everybody had the same number of dials. But in order to make that all work, you need a 0 point, if you will. For Mage Knight, for all those who know Mage Knight, there's a character in the very, 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 very first set called the Casman Fuser. He was a ranged dwarf that had basically the plainest, boringest stats. He was the 0 point. So when they built their spreadsheet for that game, they said, these are all the values that are worth 0. If you go down from that stat, you gain points back, if you will. If you go up from that value, it costs you more. So everything was based off of this standard singular figure. And that was our mindset when we did hero clicks. We used the same thing, and we made other changes to that core process. We had to, because superheroes don't, Superman never loses any powers, even if he's on his last click, he's still Superman. So we had to change other formula to make that all work, and that's why those values were different. I think now they all use one set of numbers, although I could be wrong. I don't know. It's even longer than I worked on hero clicks or a clicks game than I've worked on Pirates. We used that same process for creating Pirates. We needed a 0 point scale character, I believe, and I'm going to be totally making this up because I don't remember. I believe it was like a 2-masted English ship that had long movement. Maybe that's in the game. Singular guy. He may have been the base character.
Interesting.
And then we felt that HeroClix has a lot of other modulars, other modifiers that are not just the base powers, whether or not you're a teammate might get you powers or not. So with Pirates, what we wanted to do was give the factions value. The problem was, and you'll love this from a testing standpoint, again, getting feedback from players. When we did Spanish or the Spanish Main and a little bit of Crimson Coast, I think it wasn't really until I think the American ships came in much later. What ended up happening is the exact same Spanish ship with the exact same power may be 1 or 2 points different than the British ship with the exact same, everything exactly the same. It's because the British had better guns. We we put a modifier on their guns, while with the Spanish, we put a modifier on their, I believe, speed. I think they had the faster ships, and the British had the better guns. And then the Pirates would have no modifier because they're using used ships. They don't build their own ships; they just steal others.
Yeah.
So they had like no powers. They were maybe it was a 2-masted pirate ship. Now
Yeah,
that I say that out loud, and not a British ship.
yeah, there's
Like a
not.
two-masted pirate ship with like the two masts would have probably just I'm literally off the top of my head thinking they both had threes as their cannons with a single long movement. That may have been the base ship that we based our math on.
Interesting.
And I don't know. I mean, somebody could probably dig and find, wait, everything seems to revolve around this, and Mike was saying all the wrong things. But I'm pretty sure it was a two-masted ship, but I could be wrong.
Hmm.
It's been a really long time since I don't even own those spreadsheets anymore, so I couldn't even look them up and give you any real math data on any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's how we built the math formula. I think when we did the American ships, what we found, I think, was we gave them, let's see, maybe better movement.
Okay.
Or no, maybe what stayed away from a cargo benefit somewhere along the line because that ruined the game. That's for maybe people know this because I know Mike talks about it all the time. But I think the Dutch were originally in the game,
Yep.
and the Dutch had this huge cargo bonus. And what ended up happening is it so imbalanced the game, it almost like it was two different games. If you played without the Dutch, you had this kind of tight, almost chess-like level game. You put the Dutch in, and they were so fast and so good, it became chase the Dutch down game.
Hmm.
And it was not fun because it was known this minute you sat down. And so what we ended up doing was just taking a lot of the Dutch ships, removing that modifier off, and reusing them in the game because the stats were fine. It's just that bonus was so obvious, I guess, for lack of a better term, that it imbalanced the game. It was like literally like two different games, and
Wow.
so they got pulled real early on in the testing
Yep.
process and in the when we had it in design process, only because we just giving a bonus to cargo in a game in which the goal is to get as much gold as possible as cargo really changed especially with crew and other things,
Yeah.
it just really imbalanced the game.
Yeah.
So I think it was with the Americans that I said the Americans get no bonus or maybe something else. And
Yeah. It.
at that point, people didn't mind the same ship having more points. I don't know what happened between Spanish Main, well, the two Spanish Mains, and then Crimson Coast came out. And then when the Americans were introduced, people were just more excited about playing a new faction that was like different, had a different feel to it.
Yeah.
And the American ships were almost all more or less. They were the hunters of pirates, so we didn't want them to be as flat as pirates on the curve. We needed them to be a little bit more expensive because
Yep.
fictionally, there are no American pirates. They're not about getting gold. They're about stopping everybody else. So we needed to kind of gamify that mechanic by saying, hey, they're going to have less ships out in theory than the rest of the fleets.
Yeah.
So that was the reason why they don't have a cheapening modifier. I don't
Yeah. They
think they have
seem.
an
Yeah.
they don't have a like make things more expensive modifier. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong.
That's
That would
that's
be ridiculous.
that's what it
But
sounded like from an old podcast. But then Wolf confirmed that basically the American ships are like normal, and then the original four factions that came out before them got slight discounts based on their
yeah,
strengths. So.
yeah.
Yep.
I don't know who Wolf is, so
Yeah, he's the rules arbitrator. So from like
oh, okay.
2006 and beyond. So. Yep.
Oh, cool.
Um. Yeah, that's really
Uh,
fascinating.
so yeah, there is a spreadsheet, or there was a spreadsheet. It valued all the values. It valued all the values of the in where the real point differentiator comes from is the amount of masts and the ability. Those are
Yep.
the biggest things that were valued
That makes sense.
in a game. And then you end up having to do stuff where like you think an ability is super super powerful and you rate it really high, and then you play it and you're like, wow, that's ability just in reality is not as powerful as I thought. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit, put this ship more akin to these other ships. And that's what I would get a lot from playtesters. I would get, this ship with this combination of things, is really kind of like this ship from 3 sets ago that has a combination of things, just the power, the let's just say the cannons are different, and you'd be like, oh wow, that's yeah, I must have I've misvalued something. I maybe, it's a variant on an ability, and I thought it would be more powerful than it was. So that's the testing phase. I can design all kinds of. I could still design a pirate ship if you wanted me to, but in the testing phase, when it comes out, it's got to fit the game. And the game already existed by the time South China Seas came out. If we're going to introduce an entirely new type of ship, then it needs to fit with the other ships. It can't win the game because you're playing
Yeah.
that one ship. So
Yeah. You got to have balance in the compatibility. So, okay. So to wrap up that, so there was the formula from the start, and then that obviously persisted
yeah, and
throughout
like
the
I said, I
sets.
got to tell you right now, I don't remember if it was like I think Mike and James. James is a mathematical genius, so I think he may have come up with the initial formula, but I wouldn't be able to tell you whether how much of it was still standing by the time we got to the point where we needed to do like revolution. We may have
Yeah.
tweaked it so often by
Tweaked
that
it.
point.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes
and
sense.
then we started doing weird stuff like forts and different types of crew that had different kinds of abilities, and you've seen it,
Yep. Yeah. So you don't know if that formula is still out there somewhere or if someone still
Oh,
has
I'm
it.
sure it's someplace. There's
Yeah.
some Wizkids person. I had a laptop. My laptop that I used at Wizkids, my home got broken into way back like 2010 or 11 or no,
Damn. That sucks.
maybe even sooner than that, maybe like 2008 or something. My home got broken into and they stole my computer, unfortunately. And
Jeez.
so if I had it, it would have been on that old computer. And I've had a bunch of computers since then. But and it may, there may be an old floppy disk or a Mac hard disk someplace down in
Nice.
my basement that has some in there. I'll have to check sometime. If
Nice.
I find it, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Love it. What was your general philosophy around creating the different sets? Did you want the factions of each set to revolve more around the theme of the set, like the location and time period, or like the ongoing faction theme, like where the English were
Oh,
established to
yeah,
have the best
that's a
cannons?
good question. So as if you heard, I'm going to speak very highly of Jordan almost always. Jordan was one of these great guys who wanted to push the envelope. Um, and so, Spanish Main was the three factions. Adding the French was no big deal. That was a historical group fighting in the region. And then as we started to go, we realized we were already we were setting an example. Okay. So we were telling and also Jordan fully believes, if you know anything about Battletech, you know anything about Shadowrun, and that is the world exists that the game is in. Okay, so let's just say that. So we are making an alt history world with Spanish Main. Then because some of those characters, they appear in multiple sets. They have ongoing storylines, even if it's, three sentences in Spanish Main and three more in Crimson Coast. We kind of maintain that kind of story, characters, they're driven, they have a history. When by the time we got to Revolution, because Crimson Coast, like I said, I think the forts were actually already pre-designed,
Yeah.
and then adding the French was simple. I mean, it was not a big thing because we were going to put when we did Spanish Main, we were actually going to have the French in that game, but four factions also from a sales standpoint and a marketing standpoint. That was like a bridge too far, I think, a little bit. So we
Hmm.
we pulled them. So like Crimson Coast is really like a 1.5 rather than a release 2, if you will.
Yep.
But by the time we got to Revolution, it was like, okay, we need two things moving on. We need the world to be what's the next phase of that world. So you have the Age of Sail with Spanish Main, then you have the kind of the Age of Colonization with Crimson Coast, and then we went with the Age of Revolution with Pirates of the Revolution. So it was like that's kind of the Age of Sail storyline from like 1500 to 1700, if you will. 1812, because I really love the War of 1812.
Yep.
So it kind of goes through that period of time. and then after that, it was like, okay, well, we can't move forward. And here's a crazy story. This is a total adjunct story that I'm sure everybody's going to go, what? Jordan would have loved for us to continue that tracking
Hmm.
so that the next set after Age of Revolution would have been the middle 1800s with like the experimental metal ships that started happening to take it all the way up to the Dreadnought era. For those who don't know the Dreadnought era went basically to pre-World War One.
Yep.
Jordan loved that Dreadnought era where they decided the problem with the Dreadnought era and past the Revolution era is no one's looking for treasure on mysterious islands. And in fact, the whole point of the further and further almost takes you more into this kind of Battletech mindset of movement and distance matters more than up close and personal, which we're made a thing. By the way, this is something I'm very, very proud of that we made a boardless board game. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yep.
all right. So that's me. I did that. So
Nice.
that's the coolest part. But the once you get past the revolution point and the metal ships start coming in, we didn't want to go there. We wanted to keep it in the wooden ship age of sail, or at least in those themed times, if you will.
Yes.
Because the minute you go the metal ships, you run into three problems. One is the combat is at a distance.
Yep.
It's not up close and personal. It's more like BattleTech, if you will. Second thing that was a big problem is that's when they started to do that's when they started to round their metal.
Yep.
The cool thing about wood was, we can make these kinds of ships. When you start getting into the dreadnoughts and they have like circular gun the things and the guns come out in giant, too. We don't have to show a gun on this, but a dreadnought, that was their whole point, was big guns. The
Yep.
bigger the guns, the further distance away you can shoot. So while Jordan loved that period of time, and man, he can go on and on talking about the Russian Japanese conflict, that was the first real battle like this. It didn't make any sense for our game. It literally,
Exactly.
so we actually had to talk him out of that, and we actually spent some time looking at designing something like that using plastic, so like more of a clicks based game.
Hmm.
And so my take back to him was, wait, there's other piracy around the world that we have done nothing with. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, there's the Gold Coast of Africa. I have a game called Blackbeard. It's an old Avalon Hill board game. I love the hell out of that game because it introduced all these other areas. So the South China Sea and the Gold Coast of Africa and all this stuff. So we were like, this is actually pretty cool. We have this other thing. So that's Barbary Coast, comes right out of playing Blackbeard. South China Sea comes right out of that. Now at that point, we are now a big enough famous game. So in those cases, the goal was make sure we do Age of Sail, make sure we find other points in the Age of Sail realm from 1500s to 17 to the early 1800s, and and then and then concept their ships to be what their ships would have looked like, the Corsairs and then the junks, and do this whole kind of push of this world of piracy as opposed to the Spanish main of piracy, if you will. So those came out of just me trying to find better other places to do piracy. Then Davy Jones happened, and Davy Jones happened because Davy Jones was a giant movie. So the third movie had come out. Disney came to us. I will tell you, if you are a game designer and Disney says, "Hey, we'd like to work with you on a game," the answer should always be yes. and we got that. So that was cool. That was a real cool honor for me to work with Disney. The first time that I got to work with Disney, I now do it as a daily occurrence, but back then it was really cool. And so that then the Mysterious Islands, I believe that was Seth pushing me to do Jules Verne again, trying to figure out ways to do, now that we've introduced kind of like the cursed concept and all that kind of stuff, we went with that. Frozen North was because again, there's also another element to this, and that's what people are telling you. So we're getting feedback whenever we go to shows, whenever we meet with fans and say, "Oh, what about this?" And "Oh, I love Vikings," and I'm like, "Vikings? Hey, that's a pretty good one. We haven't done anything with those. What kind of ship do they have?" So I do deep dive into Viking culture and Viking ships. They were they were more pillagers than the other things, so their abilities need to kind of reflect that. Their ships are they weren't necessarily deep sea sailing ships like the French and the British. So we needed to you needed to constantly do that kind of stuff. By this time, I mean, by the time, I mean, just by the time Barbary Coast came out and we were introducing new ship types on a regular basis, like in every set, then that has to be something that we consider. What's the new ship type? How do we fit it into the set? Do we retire a ship type? Every ship, we need to make sure that our molds, that's the other thing. We have to make sure that the molds
Yep.
are not molds in the sense of a plastic mold. They're basically a giant piece of insanely sharp steel
Yep.
that cuts through the styrene. And so that wears out after time. So we
Yep.
have to like constantly be in a position of what set is this going to wear out on? What do we
Wow.
need to do? And so it wore out around the Davy Jones period,
Hmm.
which is why we shifted. And there's another reason too. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is that we're constantly playing that ed. Then Frozen North came out, and then Ocean's Edge, and then the cursed stuff with the cursed faction was just a rise. After with Mysterious Islands, maybe, or maybe Ocean's Edge. At this point, Jordan was no longer with WizKids, and the company wanted to try to make an IP out of this world. The problem is that if you look through the IP of this world, it's all historical figures. So that's why some of the characters from Spanish Main and Crimson Coast come back in like new forms and new identity, so that we can say no. We are, here are the characters we're pushing, and with this kind of mindset. It never happened. Pirates, it was really funny. Pirates, like, were all the talk from the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, but even by the time the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out, people were not talking about pirates so much anymore. It's hard to turn pirates into a TV show, so it was pre Netflix, Amazon, blah blah blah, in spending $1 million on theme stuff. So it kind of just went away, and this kind of, yeah, there was an IP there. And so the later ones, the impetus was, how do we focus on our characters that we're creating and the storyline that we're creating, as opposed to history. But up until then, it was literally like up until Davy Jones, it was like, how do we spread the world of piracy around? After Davy Jones, it became like, how do we find cool stories to tell within a pirate world, if you will, and keep it in that kind of same time zone timeline, but now add more fictional elements to it. I mean, even though it's Vikings, they were not really pirates of that. They were way before that period of time. So we have to kind
Yeah.
of say no, they're still around. And if we did a world map, the pirate nations of the Nordic would still be a thing, and that kind of stuff. But and then Ocean's Edge was the beginning of just the total mystery stuff. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. That's
So
really.
it's that was the thought process of creating those sets. So I don't necessarily know. It's not like we came up with a bunch of mechanics and said, "Oh my god, we need a theme. How are we going to do it?" The theme almost always came first,
Yep.
and then we and again, I will tell this to people who don't know this process. If I come up with a theme, I got to sell it to the art team, I got to sell it to the marketing team, I got to send it to my brand manager, and up until a certain point, I had to sell to Jordan. So I couldn't just come out with hey, let's do pirates all named Bill, because that would never fly. They would be like, that's boring and silly. And I'm like, okay, but if so I go, okay, let's do Barbary Coast. Here's the cool ship I'd like to do. Here's the cool pirates that were of that era, you know. And so I would have to put together effectively a pitch document internally to kind of get them to understand the direction I was going in. And at that point, then that they just basically, when you're talking to our team, and even our marketing team, the minute you show them a pitch document, they're already spinning 100 miles an hour off that kind of stuff. So that was kind of cool. That was the process I used for Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, I use it now. still to this day, because like I said, I want feedback. I want to know what people are thinking. So you know,
Yeah, love it. Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's interesting that Jordan was going to push it into a more of a chronological direction. I think it's good that it stayed a little bit more like historical within the Age of Sail, just because for me, I feel like there's a suspension of disbelief when you have dreadnoughts going against ships of the line, and it's just they should always
well,
win. You know what I mean?
that was yes, yeah, and it's not. Don't make it sound like he was not thinking it through. What he was
Yeah.
thinking was it would be a kind of an evolutionary game, if you will.
Okay.
So we would come out with the next type of pocket model game, if you will,
Yeah.
using these other ships. It would have meant that the Spanish Main, the high sail period, would be a contained game unit that
Yep.
you would just play amongst those pieces, and then this new game would be a continuation of that maybe storyline, or characters or something like that in this new thing. Yeah, I agree that in the long run, I mean, we made the right decision, but that's the kind of stuff that you again throw into the hopper to see which way to go. I
Yep.
mean, it ended up forging us to do a bunch of other things at WizKids. But that, that you got to start something. You can't just go, okay, we're going to make Pirates of the Spanish Main, and 20 sets later, what are we going to do? You just make the first one, and if it's successful, I mean, we had no idea, literally no idea it was going to be successful because nobody had done it before.
Yep.
So, and as a collectible model and a board game and the whole 9 yards. So it was, or a collectible model tabletop game. It just was, it was surprisingly awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It did
So there you go.
incredibly well. So won awards and everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. All right, that concludes this part of the interview with the amazing Pirates game designer Mike Mulvihill. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, whether that's a comment on YouTube, follow-up questions in the thread at Pirates with Ben, or commentary on Discord or Facebook. Make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. There are links in the description for this episode where you can find some of the links and resources I used, and there's also an affiliate link to buy Pirate CSG items on eBay. Consider using that link as a way to support all my efforts to keep the game alive and hopefully even revive it as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.